Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Trust. It's something that doesn't come easy to a lot of us, and usually it's something that's gotta be earned. But how many years or experiences does it really take to earn your trust, for you to trust others? What does it take to really know another person? And can you ever really? Because what's enough? Growing up in the same house, going to school together, working together for years, all you can really do is hope you've invested in the right people. But sometimes those are the very people who betray you, try to harm you. And really, whether it be every single day when we get into our cars and hit the road with hundreds of other drivers, or just in a one-on-one relationship, perhaps one of the most dangerous things we do as humans is trust other humans. So, let's get started, shall we? Three years ago was a busy, hectic time in my life. I was graduating college, started a new job, broke up with my boyfriend, and my grandpa had just died. He was pretty old, but naturally, I was sad. Normally, I try to be a very organized person, but during this time, I was especially disorganized. Sure, I managed to keep my room and car clean, but my brain was a disaster. When your brain is fried like that, it's like you have no business even taking care of yourself. At least that was my experience. One night after working an almost 12-hour shift, I found myself barely making it to my car. I was so tired. It wasn't until I was already inside the car that I realized that I didn't have to unlock anything. I was so pissed at myself. I double-checked the glove box to make sure nothing was missing. I kept my spare apartment key in the glove box, and thankfully, it was still there. I made a mental note in my flurry of mental notes to remember to lock my damn car. As I drove home, I argued with myself. Had I even opened the glove box, or was it already open? But nothing was missing, so I let myself forget and decided I'd park where I could see my car moving forward. A few nights after this, I had a strange experience at work. The first thing was when I went to grab my purse from the employee lockers. It was obvious that someone had moved my purse. I was put off by this because up until this point, I'd basically trusted everyone I worked with. But as I looked through my purse, I noticed nothing was actually missing, including the cash in my wallet, which was still there. About 30 minutes later, it was time for me to officially clock out. While walking to my car, I felt like someone was watching me. It was a strange sensation that I wasn't sure how to place, but I found myself looking around. But scanning back towards the restaurant, I can see someone peering through the back door window. I don't get a good enough look at them to see exactly who it is before they move away from the window. But it's someone, and they must work here since this door is an employee-only door and located in the back of the kitchen. It freaks me out. Just to feel someone is watching you, and then to have your fears realized, actualized, I didn't like it. So I got into my car as quickly as I could. The next day, I called in sick for work. I should have worked that night, but I'd spent the previous night and all that morning working on something that would be the difference between me graduating on time or not. So I made the split-second decision, called my friend Lily to cover me. Through all the stress, I'd basically forgotten all the weirdness from the week until later that evening when I got a call from my dad. I literally almost didn't answer because of how stressed I was, but I did anyway, sounding a little annoyed to keep it short. But before I could even finish my hello dad, he was asking me, very seriously, if I had my apartment key. A little confused, I told him of course I had my keys. He asked me again, and he told me to be sure I had my house key. Annoyed, I told him yes, I have my keys. I'm staring at my house key as we speak. And what about your spare key? He asked. For some reason, this gave me chills. I asked my dad what the hell was going on. He says he'll explain everything, but he needs to know if I have my spare key. Fine, I tell him. I'll go check. I ran to my car and went through the motions, totally expecting to find my key, and I did. I relay the message to my dad, and he tells me that they caught a man trying to break into their house that evening. My parents lived 15 minutes in the other direction from my work, and so, though concerned, I wasn't sure why they were calling me and asking about my key. My dad continues, saying he and my mom were in bed, which sounded more appropriate for 9 p.m. My parents are older, like in their 60s. I'm 23 at this point. But they weren't asleep. My mom tells my dad, whose hearing isn't so great, that she thinks someone's trying to unlock the door. The only other person with a key to my parents' house is me, and I keep it on my key ring with all my other keys in my purse. So my dad just gets up and looks out their bedroom window, from which you can see the front door. He sees a man wearing all black, including gloves, well lit under the porch light. Sure enough, he appears to be trying to get inside the door. My dad has my mom phone the police. Meanwhile, this man doesn't appear to be doing anything to try to get inside, other than trying to use this key to open the door. My dad grabs his gun, and as he walks towards the front door, he doesn't see the man through the peephole. My mom shuffles out saying that they're trying to unlock the side door now. This is a door on the side of the house that leads to the laundry room outside my parents' room. My dad heads to the only door left, the back door, and when he does, the lights are instantly triggered outside. Not by my dad, but by the man who was making his way to the same door. I guess because the inside lights were still off, he didn't seem to notice my dad standing directly on the other side of the doors, despite there being a window. Then the man tries, as he did with the others, to unlock the door with a key that clearly doesn't fit. My dad opens the door, and almost immediately the man drops everything and stumbles backwards. Before he can get up, my dad tells him not to move, all while pointing his pistol at the guy. The guy scrambled for words and said that he thought this was his friend's house. He was told to let himself in. My dad isn't buying it, asks the man what his friend's name is. After not answering for a while, he says my name. The police show up. My dad puts his gun away, and the police initially just stop the guy, saying they need to ask him some questions. So obviously my dad stays out there to get as much information as he can. At this point in the story, I stop my dad and I ask him who the hell the guy is. He says the guy's name, Shane, asking me if I know the guy. I know someone with that first name, and my mind just starts racing. My dad asks me if I know this guy. When I tell him who he is, he gets quiet. In his silence, so many thoughts are going through my head. My dad speaks up and tells me very seriously, we need to have your landlord change your locks. But why? What was going on? How did Shane from work know where my parents lived? And why did my dad think he had my key? That's when my dad told me the rest of the story. He collected the things that Shane had dropped in surprise. Among them was the key he'd been using to try to get inside my parents' house. My dad took the key, and as the police continued to speak to the man, he went inside to grab his key ring. On it, he keeps a copy of my keys. He compares the two, and they match. This is why my dad thought the man had one of my keys. He asks me if anything suspicious has happened lately, and that's when I go through the events of the last couple of weeks. After explaining everything, we realized that the guy must have made a copy of my key. I started replaying all of those moments in my head, every interaction I'd had with Shane since he started working at the restaurant. I thought of the man staring at me from the back. I played the purse and car incident over and over again in my head. Was Shane working those nights, those days? Damn me for not paying more attention, I thought. But that's when I realized something else. My address. I had never updated my address, my registration, my ID, everything in my glove box and wallet shows the same address. My parents' address. Holy shit. I literally felt so violated and immediately felt the need to recheck all of my locks and doors and windows, and I just fully panicked with my dad on the phone. That's when he had to go. He said he'd call me back once the police left. I had no idea they were even still there. But feeling 8 years old all over again, I begged him not to hang up. So he handed the phone off to my mom. She did her best to comfort me, but I hated that I could feel the fear in her voice. She wanted me to basically tell her everything I'd just told my dad, but I couldn't even get my head to stop spinning. What else had he taken? What was he going to do? I told my mom to have Dad call me back. I definitely wasn't going to be sleeping, but I needed to call my friend Lily. I asked Lily if she's still at the restaurant, and she says she is. So I ask her to send me a picture of the schedule from the last 2 weeks. She's confused but agrees to do it. I tell her I'll explain everything when I compare our schedules. I noticed that Shane was the closing cook on most of my shifts, except for Wednesdays and Fridays. It was a Wednesday that I'd left my car unlocked. A few times he would leave his shift 30 minutes after I started mine. He had time and opportunity, I reasoned with myself. The night that someone had been watching me, he was one of 2 closers. He wasn't working the night that my purse was rifled through, but almost everything else had matched. Still, something didn't feel right. One thing that just made my head spin was how absolutely under the radar this guy had been. He never struck me as someone who even wanted to talk to girls, let alone creep on them. I noticed he was a little shy. He always said hi to us girls, though almost always immediately put his head down, as if eye contact were too much for him. But I guess I'd hardly noticed him, and that kind of scared me. My dad called me back, and that's when he told me that he thought I should call my employer, that I should definitely quit my job. He tells me the police can't really confirm his identity. He's not carrying any ID, and he doesn't appear to have a vehicle nearby. My dad is furious, cursing and saying things under his breath about how they better do their job. He again mentions that I need to quit mine a few times. He's saying other stuff, but I started breaking down. But then he said something that at first just seemed like him blowing off steam, but then it makes me snap out of it immediately and ask him, "Wait, what did you just say? Short piece of shit?" Shane isn't short, not by a long shot. He's got at least a few inches on my dad and several on me. That's when I tell my dad he needs to tell the police right now that the man they're talking to isn't who he says he is. I ask my dad, describe the man to me in detail. So he does. And that's when I look at the photos of the schedules and I compare them once more. But this time, I compare them against Manny's schedule. But unlike Shane, Manny's is a perfect match. Except for Fridays, and tonight was Friday. I tell my dad I know exactly who that guy is. I go on Facebook and take a screenshot of Manny's Facebook. I send it to my dad. He tells me to hold on while he shows the officer. I felt slightly fired up at this point. I shout to my dad that he's impersonating someone and I can prove it. He still has me on hold, and I'm pacing within my apartment. Finally, I hang up. I call Lily's cell phone and explain everything. She's shocked. She also throws in that she wishes I would have told her what I was doing earlier, because she could have told me that Shane was working tonight. We spend a couple of minutes talking about how shocked we both are. We've both known Manny for over a year. We would have never, in a million years, have predicted he'd be capable of anything remotely shady. He was kind, helpful, but not too helpful. I mean, the guy had a fucking family. We both met his kid, his wife. I tell Lily I gotta call her back. My dad's calling. I answer, and he tells me Manny's been arrested. He sounds defeated, and I assume it's because he's tired. But then he tells me the police searched Manny's bag, and it was clear he had nefarious intentions. It was also clear that he'd initially lied to police about his identity. I begged my dad to tell me what they found in the bag, and reluctantly, he eventually did. Duct tape, zip ties, a ski mask, condoms, lube, pills, a knife, and a photo of his family. What the actual fuck? Sick to my stomach is the only way I can describe how I felt. I wasn't even scared anymore. I was just fully disgusted, and it dawned on me how goddamn lucky I was. I'd been so stressed out, letting a lot of things slip my mind. I'd let my guard down, probably, but I'd also forgotten to do simple things like update my address, and thank fucking God for that. I did end up quitting my job. So did Lily. Why? Because Manny started showing up again. He had gotten out of jail, and he was trying to get his job back. Absolutely not. This is how people end up dead, staying in places like this. School was over for me. Nothing was keeping me there, so I left. I decided to keep my address as my parents' and use a P.O. box for everything else. I moved to somewhere I won't name here, somewhere far enough away that I don't think Manny could find me. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it, just about all the time. Last year I was airlifted to the hospital after a major accident, and I spent most of the day in surgery. I don't really remember much about the collision itself. One second I was driving along, and the next there was suddenly a truck in front of my car. The world went black, and then there were random flashes of lights, people, and blinding pain, until there wasn't. At one point, all feelings stopped, and a sense of peacefulness washed over me. I wasn't frightened or in shock, just extremely calm. There was an unquestioned certainty that everything was going to be okay. It felt like waking up from a deep sleep. I thought I was in bed. When I first opened my eyes, everything was blurry and a little disorienting. Then I realized the disorientation was because I expected to be laying down. But I was seeing everything from a standing perspective. Not only that, I was in a room full of doctors, yet everything was totally fine. As my vision cleared, so did my muddled mind, and I realized the person those doctors were all crowding around was me. I remembered the accident, and I understood with an emotionally detached fascination that I must be in the hospital. An older woman with gray hair and glasses said that if I had any chance of surviving, they needed to stop the abdominal bleeding first. And a slightly younger man with a large mole on his cheek argued that there wasn't enough time to do it before a head CT. The woman asked if he felt that way because it was in my best interest or because he needed to make his flight to Miami, and a tense silence fell over the room. For the first time, I noticed a radio was playing in the background. It was on Kiss Q72, and they were playing The Sign by Ace of Base, which is kind of ironic in itself, I guess. I'm not sure how long I oversaw my own operation, but it felt like a very short time. Eventually, everything got really blurry again, and I woke up in recovery. I remember bits and pieces of the doctor's conversation, like how the older woman's nickname had been Betty Ballbreaker in med school, and that her husband is named Dave, but I assumed it was all just a weirdly vivid, drug-induced dream. Seeing that I was up, a nurse came over, and I ended up telling her all of it. She urged me to give her every detail, no matter how small. So I told her about the radio, which song I heard too. I thought she was just being nice while she tested my mental faculties. But when I started talking about the man's flight to Miami and Betty Ballbreaker, she went pale and dropped her pen. When I finished, she left and came back with a short woman. I immediately recognized her as one of the nurses from my dream. When I said as much, she accused my post-op nurse of telling me to say that. I repeated my whole story again, and she went as white as the First Lady had. She confirmed every song I listed had been playing, and the next time they returned, it was with both of my doctors. In total, I repeated this story more times than I can count on that first day alone. I've probably told it hundreds of times since, too. Everyone always thinks that it must be a cool story to have, but it doesn't really work that way with near-death experiences, at least not for me. I don't enjoy reliving the worst day of my life, but I would like to know if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this. Whatever happened to me, it had to be real. My information was accurate enough to turn a hospital's entire night shift into believers. I didn't see a bright light. My life didn't flash before my eyes. I was just there, hanging around outside of my body. I know this is going to sound weird, but the same could be said for just about everything on this website, so here goes nothing. We have a haunted tree behind our house. We live in a normal suburban neighborhood. There's no cemeteries or creepy abandoned houses nearby, just a bunch of mostly normal neighbors. Our backyard isn't even that big. In fact, we only have that one tree. But there's a ghost living in it, nonetheless. We moved here 6 years ago, but nothing happened until our second 4th of July. My little brother, Seth, was 5. He'd been playing in the backyard for too long, and Mom wanted him to come in. I went to the patio doors and saw him standing beneath the tree with his little neck craned back, looking straight up. I called for him 3 times, but he never even flinched, so I decided it would be quicker to drag him inside. As I got closer, I could hear him chattering away and assumed he was lost in one of his fantasies. Then I heard a second voice. This one was deep, like it belonged to a grown man. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I heard it as clearly as I'd heard my brother. I didn't try to go any closer, but I also didn't want the man to know that I heard him, trying to seem more annoyed than frightened. I turned around and said I was going to send Dad out if he didn't come inside. I didn't look back to see him running towards me until I was safely through the door. Once Seth was in, I locked it and called our parents. The patio doors are mostly glass. I didn't take my eyes off of that tree until the whole thing was over. My brother and I were crying. Mom was shaking so bad she could hardly talk, and Dad scared our neighbors while looking for an invisible intruder. To this day, he's known as the man who yells at trees. My parents knew I was too upset to be lying, but they definitely thought I was mistaken. Seth was upset that we scared his friend away before he could learn his name or how he got that big hole in his neck. Excluding that gruesome detail, he described the man as thin, extremely pale, clean-shaven with short hair. When asked what they talked about, Seth said the man asked him basic questions like his name and age. We were freaked out for a while after that. But when a couple of weeks passed without anything unusual happening, we all moved on. We didn't have a reason to think about it again until Christmas Eve. It doesn't really snow here, but the leaves thin out a good bit. Around 10 that night, we received a frantic call from one of our neighbors saying there was a man in our tree. My dad calmly thanked her for calling, hung up, walked outside without saying a word to any of us. Needless to say, there was nobody in the tree. Mom called Mrs. Peterson back to ask what the man looked like. She said that he was skinny, with short hair, but it was too dark to make out his features. Not the following spring, but the one after. A friend and I were doing an art project beneath the tree when a sudden cry of pain sounded directly above our heads. It was the kind of surprised noise someone makes after having their hand unexpectedly slammed in a car door. I never told my friend, or anyone for that matter, about the weird stuff that happened with that tree. So she was caught completely off guard, when she glanced up to see a pale man sitting in the branches. She also said that it looked as if his neck was bleeding, but she didn't want to look at him for too long. The moment she saw him, she screamed and ran inside. I looked up as she was running away, more out of a reflex than desire, but I didn't see anything. He was gone just that fast. I have no doubt my friend really saw him. The similarities are too close to be a coincidence, and even now, she believes she saw a real person. That brings us to our current problem. Yesterday, my brother got a dog for his birthday. She's the best girl and does great inside, but when we let her into the backyard, she runs straight to the tree and barks at it until we drag her back in. She's making it a lot harder to ignore all of this. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I've just gotten out of a horrible ordeal. Since finding this community, I've read a lot of stories similar to mine, and they've encouraged me to share my own. I think a big part of why I waited so long is because I've known Brady since kindergarten. I didn't want to believe he was capable of hurting me. When you only go to one small school for your entire life, you get to know your classmates fairly well. Brady and I were always friends, but we didn't start dating until our sophomore year. I felt so lucky to have him. All of the girls had rocky relationships with immature football players who cheated on them or bragged about their sex lives. But Brady wasn't like that. In fact, he was the exact opposite in every way. He wanted to spend all of our time together. And when we couldn't be together, he wanted to be on the phone or at least texting. Even if I had to do homework or eat, he would message me the whole time and become annoyed if I didn't answer fast enough. At first, it made me feel special, and he was even kind of cute when he got upset. It wasn't a scary type of anger, more like a pouty puppy who doesn't want to go in his kennel. But as I transitioned out of the honeymoon phase, it became less endearing and more annoying. I wasn't even allowed to have a girls' day without the world coming to an end. We could spend every night of the week together, but if I wanted to spend one of them with my friends, he would say that I should just break up with him if I didn't love him anymore. It's not like I wanted to do girls' night every week, just once a month, maybe. But most of the time, Brady was a gentle, caring sweetheart. He could make me laugh until I cried without even trying. I truly believe that he could have been a comedian if he put his mind to it. I dealt with his control issues until junior year, when I went to my grandmother's house for Christmas, and Brady couldn't handle it. She lived 6 hours away, so there was no chance to see each other for the entire week. I knew that it would be hard on him, so I tried to break the news to him gently, but he lost his mind. That was the first time I saw him express true anger, and it terrified me. I said that we could have a special early Christmas before I left and promised to make New Year's one to remember, but I don't think he heard a word I said. He just kept crying, and I went home after he punched a hole in his wall. The next day, he sent me a long message saying we were through if I went to my grandmother's, and considering my parents weren't giving me a choice, my hands were kind of tied. It broke my heart for it to end that way. I never dreamed he would break up with me, and now it happened because of one lousy week with my family. I know this sounds insane, but I was a teenager experiencing my first broken heart. So I was furious with my parents, not Brady. It was their fault that we broke up. They were forcing me to abandon him. That's what he convinced me was happening, that he wasn't dumping me, I was abandoning him. It's amazing what an emotionally distressed teenager will believe. In my anger, I told my parents everything in a very dramatic manner. I explained how they were essentially ruining my life by making me go to my grandmother's, and I swore I would never forgive them if they didn't let me stay home. Obviously, they were incredibly concerned, but not for the same reasons. They tried so hard to reason with me, to explain Brady's reaction wasn't normal, and how that level of attachment is unhealthy or even dangerous. I think they were trying to make me understand how wrong it was without frightening me. Ultimately, they ended the conversation by saying the distance would be good for both of us, and that was the end of that, as far as they were concerned. Brady didn't speak to me the entire time I was gone, and when we returned to school, he avoided me like the plague. No matter what I did, he wouldn't even acknowledge me, so I gave up. I thought if he had time to calm down, he would realize there was no reason to fight. Only that wasn't the case. He stopped ignoring me and began terrorizing me instead. It was nothing physical, just harassing texts and snaps, spreading rumors, all that good stuff. It lasted through the rest of the school year. And then I spent the entire summer at my grandmother's house. Brady stopped harassing me a few weeks later. When school started back, I learned it was because he had a new girlfriend, and I felt the biggest sense of relief. I had been terrified of my senior year being full of drama and heartache, but now I was free. It actually was a great year, and I moved away for college after graduation, but I had to quit after my first year. My mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I had to move back home to help take care of her while Dad worked. I got a job waiting tables at night so I could help with household expenses. And Brady couldn't have been further from my mind. I practically forgot he existed until he walked into the restaurant and sat in my section a couple of weeks ago. If I had seen him sooner, I would have given the table to someone else, but I was asking for his drink order by the time I recognized him. He was with a couple of guys we went to high school with, so we all had an awkward mini reunion, and I truly couldn't get them out of there fast enough. That being said, Brady seemed completely normal towards me. He wasn't flirty, overbearing, cold, or awkward, and I left work that night feeling good about the encounter. I didn't really expect to hear from him again. A week later, he sent me a friend request on Facebook, and I accepted it. I was admittedly worried about how he might react if I ignored it, but I really didn't think that he would cause any harm. After all, I could always block him later. It was only 3 days later that I had to block him. He messaged me the moment I accepted his request. He liked and commented on all of my pictures, and he kept trying to ask me out. I would have loved for us to be friends, but he needed to see someone about his attachment issues before entering into another relationship. Once I finally accepted that, I tried to explain it to Brady in the gentlest way possible. But he reacted exactly the same as when I went to visit my grandmother. After going in circles for over an hour, there was nothing more I could do except block him. About 30 minutes later, my phone began ringing off the hook with a slew of random numbers that were all Brady using some caller ID spoofing app. I'm not sure how he got my number, but I know it was him. When the calls finally stopped an hour later, the text started not 10 minutes after. I didn't respond to any, I just blocked each number as they came through. But he would go from asking why I didn't love him to telling me how I was broken. One message would pledge his undying love for me, and the next he would call me a selfish bitch who didn't deserve him. The text stopped after only 10 or 15 phone numbers, and I could finally relax. I hadn't considered that if he tracked down my phone number, he might have been able to track down my address as well. I tried to have a normal night and go to bed at my usual time, but I was in and out of consciousness. When I first heard someone moving around the apartment, I thought that it was a dream, but then I very clearly heard the click of my bedroom door opening, and I was wide awake in an instant. I knew it was Brady. There's no way a burglar just so happened to break into my apartment the same night that he was harassing me. I could barely hear his footsteps over my pounding heart, but it sounded as if he were just pacing back and forth at the foot of my bed, like he was working up his nerve. I couldn't decide if I should keep pretending to be asleep or sit up and beg him to leave. It was driving me crazy not to be able to see him. Occasionally, his steps would pause, and those moments were the worst. I pictured him leaning over me with a knife and suddenly plunging it into my back. But then I heard the hammer of a gun being cocked, and I knew it wasn't a knife he planned to use. I was too overcome with fear to hold it in any longer. A loud sob escaped into my pillow, and I forced myself to sit up so that I could face my murderer. He was now standing next to my bed, and his gun was pointed right at my chest. I screamed, I cried, I begged him not to shoot me. I wasn't thinking about anything else. The entire world melted away. Brady and I were the only two people left in existence. I didn't think my life flashed before my eyes, but time did slow down to an incredibly slow speed. It almost felt like I'd be able to dodge the bullet if he did pull the trigger. It gave me time to think. I tried to convince Brady that I wanted him back, that it wasn't too late. I said all of the words I thought he wanted to hear. Sometimes I thought it was working, and other times I thought he would just shoot me no matter what I said. Thankfully, I'll never have to know which answer was correct. The lady who lives beneath me heard every word and called the police. They came with their sirens off so they wouldn't spook Brady. Then they used some sort of heat vision goggles to see that he was now standing just a few feet away with his gun trained on my chest. One minute I was groveling for my life, and the next, there was a loud bang mixed with the sound of shattering glass, and I felt something hot, wet, and sticky splash all over my face. It was Brady's blood. He died instantly without making a sound. Seconds later, a bunch of cops charged into the room and confirmed the only one threat was now quite harmless. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, but I'll take that over being the one who was shot any day. I don't want my relief to be mistaken for happiness. I'm not happy he's dead. I wish that he could have gotten the help that he needed, but at least I won't be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me tonight. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, the support means the world over here, so thanks again. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough to find those deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks again to all of you for listening. A huge shout out to all of my patrons whom I appreciate so very much: Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, Marion T, The Dark Cosmos, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon, patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.